The altitude is a line that can be found inside a triangle that will start at a vertex and it will be perpendicular to the opposite side. So let's say my altitude starts at vertex A, then it will go directly to BC, which is the opposite side, and be perpendicular to it. So this is really the height of your triangle. So think of the altitude like the height. Now, because the altitude is related to a perpendicular side, our first step is going to be to find the slope of BC, because that is something I can do because I will have those coordinates given to me. Now, once I find the slope of my opposite sides, then I can take a negative reciprocal, because when I take the negative reciprocal, I will get my perpendicular slope. And now that I have the slope of my altitude right here, then the only point I know on this line is vertex A. So I'm going to use my perpendicular slope and the vertex to find the y-intercept. So let's go ahead and try that out in example number 1. So we have triangle PIG and it has the following 3 coordinates, and we want to find the altitude from vertex P. So we're going to start off by plotting these points just to get a visual of what the altitude would look like in the triangle. So 1, 4 for P, -5, 2 for I, and 5, -3 for G. And I will just connect these points. If you have a ruler, that would be great. Now I want the altitude from P. So I know I'm going to start here, and then I'm just going to draw what my height would look like from P. So that's what I'm looking for. And just drawing this and the fact that I drew this right angle tells me that I want to find the slope of IG so I can take a negative reciprocal. So I'm just going to look at IG and I'm going to label slope of IG. So I'm going to do y2 minus y1, x2 minus x1. So I'll just label my coordinates and apply my slope formula. So y2 is -3, subtract y1 is 2, x2 is 5, minus x1 is -5. Now I'll just clean this up. -3 minus 2 is -5. 5 minus -5 means 5 plus 5, which is 10, and reduce your fraction if you can. Now this is the slope of IG, which is clearly not the same as my altitude. My altitude is perpendicular to this, so I'm going to take my negative reciprocal. So good communication would be put the slope, so m, and then put this little right angle to show that you're taking the perpendicular slope. And a negative reciprocal means change the sign, so my original slope is negative, my perpendicular slope will be positive then. And reciprocal means flip your fraction. So instead of a half, I will have 2 over 1, which is just 2. Which means in my equation, I have y equals 2x plus b so far. Now I have to sub a point in for x and y to solve for b. The only point that I can sub in is P, because that is the only one that I know that is on my altitude, and I can see that from my diagram right here. I have no idea what this point is, and it has nothing to do with midpoint. So the only point I can sub in is point P. So instead of y, I will write 4, and instead of x, I will write 1, and now I'm just going to isolate for b. So 2 times 1 is 2. Bring the 2 over, and we change the sign. So 2 will be our y-intercept. And if I look at my sketch here, yes, I drew my altitude roughly, but that seems about right. So my altitude equation is y equals 2x plus 2. So we found the slope of our opposite side. We took a negative reciprocal because we had to think about perpendicular. Then we subbed our vertex in. The step from here, when we take a negative reciprocal and we sub a point in, that is very grade 9. All of these skills are actually grade 9. You just have to remember what the altitude is. And if you think of the altitude like a height, that should guide your steps. Now let's try our last examples. We have triangle ABC, and we want to find the altitude from B. So I'm going to start with a little sketch here. Just draw a triangle. It's not going to be to scale. And because I want the altitude from B, I'm going to put vertex B on top, and I'll put A and C on the sides. And I'm just going to draw what the altitude would look like. It looks like the height of the triangle, and this already tells me what my first step is. I want to find the slope of AC, so I can then take that negative reciprocal. So I'm looking at A and C, and I want to find my slope. Now, if you would like to pause the video here and try to find the altitude on your own, that would be great. Otherwise, I will get started. So y2 is -4, subtract y1 is 8, x2 is 0, subtract x1 is 6. Now I clean up. -4 minus 8 is -12, 0 minus 6 is -6. And this will reduce not only to 12 divided by 6 is 2, but negative divided by negative is positive. So make sure that the slope of AC is positive. And I did forget to put my notation here, but this is good communication. It will also help guide your steps. Now that I have the slope of AC, I will take my perpendicular slope, so I'll take the negative reciprocal. So my slope started positive, so my negative reciprocal will be negative. And the slope was 2/1, so the reciprocal is 1/2, which means the equation I have so far is -1/2 x plus b. And there's only one point that you're allowed to sub in for x and y, and that is b, because our altitude is starting at b, and that's the only point that we know that is on there. So instead of y, I'll put -2. My slope, I'm just going to put that negative up in the numerator. And when I put the x coordinate in, I'm going to write it over 1 so I can multiply my fractions. And now when I multiply my fractions, I'll multiply my numerators, and I know 2 negatives make a positive, and then multiply the denominators. And if the fraction reduces, reduce it. That way you don't have to worry about getting a common denominator when you move it over. So now I can bring that 1 over, -2 minus 1, which is -3 for my y-intercept. So the equation of this altitude is y equals -1/2 x minus 3. And now, just a little fun fact about your altitudes. If you were to draw all 3 altitudes inside your triangle, they will all intersect at the same point, and that point is called your orthocenter. So I am just going to do a little sketch to show you what that would look like. So here's one altitude, and it is going to be very rough because I have to estimate what the right angles would look like. But there it is. It's not perfectly to scale, but that right there, that is your orthocenter. And that's it for altitudes. Just remember, think of the altitudes like the height, and that way it will guide the steps of find the slope of the opposite side so that you can take a negative reciprocal, then sub your vertex in, and you're pretty much done.